Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios base capsule. It's really hot outside. Like, I don't even want to go out. I mean, I went outside for a few minutes earlier, then I just felt like my lungs were about to fill up. It was pretty bad.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional radio.
So, like I said, it's hot out there. But I've got some really, actually good news about Tesla, of all things. And normally I like to complain about Tesla, but this is one of those things that's like, bravo! The last quarter, they reported that over half of the vehicles produced and delivered are using cobalt-free lithium iron phosphate batteries. No more, No more conflict batteries. Conflict-free batteries from Tesla. About time. And who cares if they don't have the same like energy density as nickel, cobalt, lithium batteries or lithium, whatever they are, the LC, and it doesn't matter. They charge faster. And they're easier to produce because iron is very, very, very plentiful. And this is fantastic. Basically, the only ones that don't have these are the vehicles with extended range, or the monumentally oversized like SUV thing that has those stupid gull-wing doors. But all of the Model 3 and Model Y that are just they don't have extended range. They have new battery technology, and that's really good. And then on top of that, they've also started using less exotic materials for their magnet structures. They're using electromagnets in some of their systems. So ferrite magnets are like a ceramic composition of various materials, and they're a lot easier to produce. They don't require massive mines that just completely destroy huge swaths of land. No, we can produce plenty of the material to produce ferrous magnets like all day long. And so if they figured out a way to create motor drive systems that use available materials that don't rely on exotic materials, the prices for all of these things should be coming down. And this is all really good stuff. The only thing that kind of sucks lately about all this kind of updated technology is that a lot of it's coming from CATL, the Chinese battery company. And so these vehicles are not eligible for the $7,500 tax credit.
Well, it seems like the technology is shifting dramatically on all fronts in terms of Hyundai's hybrid, where they're doing like a hydrogen electric hybrid.
Yeah, man, Hyundai and Kia Group are they're building future cars right now. It's amazing.
Yeah, this shit looks amazing. So I think it is cool, to see that Tesla is not stagnant on that type of tech, but I think it's that whole space is moving forward because they're gonna have to all abandon it by 40, or is it? I think it's 2030 in some
2030
places.
in some most places, I think.
Which then makes it 2030 in all places, effectively.
I think it's still 2035 in America.
Which the issue becomes a lot of American production takes place overseas, or in Mexico. So it's gonna have to shift with the rest of the world anyway.
Ford's best-selling mini truck, their Maverick, is made in Mexico. Toyota's getting ready to build a new unibody truck in Mexico.
I think at one point, the most Ford truck was built in America was 75% in America. That it was actually being constructed, and the parts were still coming from abroad. I mean, insignificant. So there's no such thing as an American car anymore.
I'm pretty sure that Ford licenses their hybrid technology from Toyota. That shit's definitely built in Japan. And those are probably their most fuel-efficient vehicles, is their hybrids. I'm actually really excited, like in the how this kind of new battery technology being adopted at the high end is gonna, eventually find its way down into the mainstream for like hybrid vehicles, because I'm firmly in the opinion of I don't think that the batteries are there to support the needs of people who drive trucks, who actually need to drive trucks, like contractors and people who are hauling shit daily. Like, not talking about Maverick owners but like people who have big truck needs. And a hybrid makes a lot of sense because if they can just generate the electricity on site with an extremely efficient engine with extremely efficient fuel, high energy density fuel like we already have, and then power electric motors, much like range extenders. I think the best hybrid vehicles right now are essentially running range extended electric power plants. And so I think that there's a lot of space for that, where these kinds of batteries that can charge really quickly, like very very quickly, this is going to help a lot of, it's going to help the entry level for people who need a vehicle but can't afford, a $40,000 electric car. Even the promise of the $26,000 electric car is still like years away, and by then the cost of manufacturing will go up, the cost of materials will go up, and it'll end up being a $30,000 car, because I mean, not even Volkswagen can control the economy of the world.
Well, yeah, and I think what is it, Mercedes and Porsche getting more electric.
Oh yeah, well, Mercedes has an entire electric line that nobody seems to be talking about.
Not yet.
Yeah.
But once they're fully transitioned, then that's all you're going to see on the roads, because rich people aren't going to want to drive like old Mercedes.
Yeah.
That's not what Mercedes are about. So.
And even Subaru is moving in towards an all-electric line. It's pretty impressive. Like, we're seeing, like, right up front, like, which car companies are actually listening to the people that drive their vehicles. And it's like, in some ways it's kind of unified. Like, it seems as though people who want to drive a vehicle don't want to be a part of the whole, like, oil war system. On some level, that seems to be like a unifying factor, and like, also, let's contribute less to pollution. I saw
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I saw this really well put together infographic about the long term projections for carbon emissions over the lifetime of a vehicle, and the way that people own and operate vehicles now. Nobody is going to own a gas vehicle long enough to the point where it even equalizes the carbon output of modern electric vehicles, because they all have the same manufacturing process. Now they're all built on the same kind of assembly lines, so those factors are kind of irrelevant. And then as our rubber compounds for tires improve, the tire wear will equalize, and they might be more robust, but they'll last a lot longer. But nobody's holding on to vehicles, to like gas vehicles anymore. You gotta drive them for like 20 years or 200,000 miles, and that doesn't happen. It's like the 100,000 mile warranty means, yeah, you might get 30, 40,000 more miles out of it, but this engine's done. And transmissions too; those things aren't serviceable anymore. They're designed to be replaced.
Yeah, parts have come down a lot, and for better or for worse, in terms of like they last as much as they're supposed to, and then a lot of them break down.
Yeah.
Like, usually not something that's going to be a catastrophic failure, which is great in terms of like most of the stuff that is the main infrastructure on cars is like so stress tested before a person can actually get to it that it's like you're pretty safe, like,
Yeah.
9 out of 10 times, in terms of like, when there's a recall, it's like they could have stress tested more to get that usually, but the reason they get the recall is because it's usually before a lot of people have already suffered from that problem.
Oh
So that's
yeah.
where I'm like, that system works pretty well. So
But man, the auto industry is so heavily regulated. I mean,
yeah, it didn't start off that
incredible.
way.
Yeah, they definitely did not. Yeah, I mean, what was it? There was a time when seatbelts were like, what is this thing? And the idea of an airbag didn't even exist, or bumpers that could actually like deform and crumple and have crumple zones. Those weren't even things. People just died in car
Well,
crashes.
I think there's something about Americans that's hyper individualistic and simultaneously hyper unaware of self that makes people real American people specifically really dangerous on the roads. Whereas you go to other countries, they don't need as much traffic, um, like direction by the state because they're aware of other people on the road in a way that
Yeah.
Americans don't seem to be. And like I I think this has been a problem since the automobile has been on the road in America, just judging by the history of automobiles and like traffic signals and
Oh man, I think
accidents.
it might go back to like cowboy days with riding horses and with
Oh, I'm
carriages
sure.
and
I'm
shit like
sure.
that.
I think that's exactly part of it is in terms of like there's been this freedom to like go anywhere, which I think contributes to the off-road um automobile culture, which is like that's this whole separate niche culture that really is like you're saying. It's like somebody if they had a horse and was able to do what were able to do with the horse with the car. I
Yeah.
think ultimately that's a lot of the like impetus behind the off-road culture.
Not
Not
gonna lie,
necessarily 100%.
that's actually kind of what it is for me because in my truck I can load up with a lot more than I could ever possibly imagine to carry, and then transport it to a place where there are no other people, and then I can set up a little kitchen out in the middle of nowhere and make a nice meal in a quiet place.
But ultimately that comes down to not being restricted by the roads that have been laid. And I
Yeah.
think that's like the
That's a
American
super luxury. I don't.
it's a
I acknowledge
luxury,
that it's a
but
super
some people
luxury.
you acknowledge it as a luxury, but some people feel it's their right.
Mm.
So that's a completely different perspective when you think it's your right to just go anywhere, like unrestricted by roads, even. So I think like you have like a very and what's funny to me is like I think you have a native perspective or like an indigenous view of how to use and interact with the land within a modern framework, whether you know it or not. Whereas a lot of people try to assert a modern framework onto the land, and in that they're not like going places and leaving it the same way that it was before they came. It's like they go and leave trash and they don't give a fuck because they don't look behind them. They're going like the people
No, I like
well,
literally have a bucket and trash bags just to pick up shit when I go
oh,
to.
I know. I mean, I've never even gone on like a camping trip, but I already know that you're that type of person. Whereas there's another type of quote unquote off-roader that climbs Mount Everest, but the Sherpa's like carrying them the entire way because to
They're leaving
them,
their fucking oxygen tanks, just leaving them on the fucking trail.
well, and it's like all of that, but that person doesn't have the same respect for the land that someone who goes into nature and leaves it unmolested and that there's like and it's the same shit with these Titan fucks. It's like there's a huge disrespect for nature that makes a person think that they can hack together a submersible that's gonna best the ocean, that
Yeah.
is the thing that has given all of us life and has sustained this planet for billions of years at this point. To think that you can best that thing by yourself and not use all of the science that humanity has accumulated before to do something, it's like that's the biggest narcissistic delusion that comes with a lot of these people who they want to like buy their way into nature, and that's not the way nature works. Like, you have to respect the land that you're going into. If you go, like, for example, if you go camping, let's say Arizona, you go camping out in a place that's
Pretty inhospitable.
very inhospitable. In the day, you're going to have to deal with super hot temperatures. In the night, you're going to have to deal with really cold temperatures. And if you don't understand the land, there's no amount of paying your way around it that's going to get you to be able to survive the inhospitability of going out into that and not understanding it. Like,
Yeah.
if you pay somebody else to understand it for you, oh yeah, you're going to fucking come back, of course. But the person who goes out there without the actual person who understands the thing into which they're venturing, it's not a sure thing that they're going to come back alive. And it's even like the people who know what they're doing is not sure that they're going to come back alive. They just have a higher chance because they know what dangers to look for and what things to avoid. And I'm convinced now that being a white man who is self-destructive is actually super profitable in a way that other demographics don't get. I don't think anybody should necessarily be
Aspire to that.
profit. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, exactly. I don't think anybody should be aspiring to make their self-destruction profitable. Like, rap music for black men is like the best example I can come up with in terms of like a lot of toxic rap culture is super self-destructive, but it's also super profitable. But every aspect of like black self-destruction isn't necessarily profitable. Whereas like you look at, okay, this is where I was thinking, this is like a thing that people don't even realize that we've been conditioned into. I don't know exactly when it started, but I can point to people who are like 1,000% self-destructive, like Bam Margera and the Jackass crew. Like they all got famous on self-destruction, and some of them got better at not destroying themselves. Whereas like you look at Bam, he's now turned to everyone outside of himself as well. So he's like self-destructive and externally destructive because he's never had any actual repercussions that were like, oh, I thought I was gonna die. Like, he's had friends who died, but then he just used that to destroy himself further because he still feels invincible. And this is like something I recognize in people who have self-destructive behaviors are basically like testing the boundaries of their invincibility. And it's one of those things where like you see it especially in teenage boys, not just white boys, but like driving fast or like jumping off of things or like skateboarding. There's certain things where people are like, oh, I've never broken a bone before, I wonder if I could be like Tony Hawk and also never break a bone in the process. And then 2 weeks later their fucking arms in a sling because they found their invincible limits. And it's like, you know, I know early on in terms of like cutting oneself where you're like, oh shit, I like grabbed the wrong end of a knife on accident or something, like, or burn myself on a pot where you're like, oh shit, this skin can definitely like, you know, it can bubble if heat hits it. It's not fucking titanium alloy underneath. Like, I'm definitely not a Terminator, no matter how much I want to believe it in my mind. Like, I can definitely lose a finger if I mishandle my sword, which is why I don't fucking play with it. And there's like people who like don't understand those things because they never got the right lesson at the right time. And then they'll like twirl a sword and then fucking cut their cheek, or like accidentally cut themselves, almost take an ear off, and then laugh about it because, oh shit, if I wasn't wearing my glasses, I would have taken off my ear. you need to stop fucking playing with sharp objects. That person needs to chill the fuck out and stop tempting fate. But there's like a demographic of people who don't have any real life pressures who then tempt fate because it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about cops fucking pulling me over and shooting me. So I'm gonna like race. I'm gonna go out and fucking drive real fast illegally because I'm actually not concerned if a cop catches me that cop's gonna kill me. I'm not, even if a cop pulls me over, I'm still not concerned. And that's like, you know, there's this huge demographic that don't have I'm not saying that their stress response has been desensitized to the point of not existing, because they're constantly trying to find it, but I think society has like desensitized white men and white boys to external pressure and stress, and that does not extend to everybody else. Like, it doesn't extend to Asian people, it doesn't extend to black people, it doesn't extend to Latin people, it doesn't extend to anybody else, it doesn't extend to white women for that matter. So like, this protection and like not having a fear of imminent death at any moment, because that's the way one should actually operate in terms of like existential threats. We live in a chaotic universe, even though this planet that we're on has Jupiter to absorb a lot of the fucking
and Saturn
space debris, and Saturn, but Jupiter is like
the big boy,
you know, the big boy that takes a lot of it up. And it's like, to have that, we in the inner Goldilocks zone of the universe start to get comfortable and start to forget we live in a fucking hostile universe. It's not a docile, it's actively hostile towards anything and everything because of fucking chaos. Chaos does not fucking care about anything. So within that construct, we have to start understanding where empathy and caring gives us the capacity to resist dying unnecessarily in chaos. So for example, like a tornado, like emergency services and building structures are the things that we use to basically like resist dying in that type of chaotic event, whether it's a tornado or a hurricane. But if you start to forget that a tornado is a chaotic event and you start to think, oh, it's tornado season, oh, we can start to predict the weather, we can see these things coming, well, then there starts to be a comfort
hey, come out back, there's a tornado, I can see it.
Bro, have you seen that video of the guy like mowing the lawn where there's a tornado in the distance? And it's like, these motherfuckers, of course it's a white man. Of course. These motherfuckers are too complacent and do not respond to stress correctly because society protects them so much that they have to get like, they have to jump out of planes and fucking bungee jump off of buildings and fucking base jump and fucking like street luge and like come up with all these ways. Like, I'm gonna jump a fucking bunch of motorcycles in a school bus. That ain't a goddamn black person or Asian person or a fucking white woman doing that. It's a white man because they don't have actual like existential threats the way that everybody else does. And a lot of time the existential threat is white men who feel complete freedom to work within that system, like the Jeffrey Dahmers and shit. So it's like, and the Ted Bundys and the like, of course there's black men and like Asian men who kill, but it's not with the same feeling of impunity, and it's for completely different reasons in terms of like the whole reason that Jeffrey Dahmer story was like so gripping and compelling to a lot of people is they displayed how the police would give back fucking non-white victims to Jeffrey Dahmer. If those victims were white, the police would not have done that. That's the point of putting those parts of the story in, and people didn't fucking get it. So I think there's this element of like, gay men don't all have the same existential threat. Fucking gay women don't all have the same existential threat. There is a racial element that people have to deal with. There is a cultural element that people have to deal with. There is a and then there's like a sexual identity element that people have to deal with, and sometimes these things intersect in a way that compounds, and it becomes more dangerous to the person who has more, like, okay, let me paint this person like a former Coptic Christian Egyptian trans gay person who's a trans male but is homosexual with gay men. That person has way more like identity crises than a white Republican gay male. Not to say that the white Republican gay male doesn't have existential threats, but they're way, way different than that other person, even though they're both gay. Like, it's in terms of how Americans break down the threat of life, they want to equate everybody's existential threats as if like poor white people's existential threats are the same as everybody else. And in the process, they want to make it seem like by expressing the difference in existential threats that it's minimizing the existential threats to poor white people. That's not what it's doing. It's identifying the disparity, and in the process, the poor white people aren't equipped to understand what these people are saying because they're not given the proper educational foundation to access that conversation either. So there's like a huge divide happening between poor white people, rich white men, and then what poor white people and white people think that they get in society by proxy of being white, when in reality, that thing only protects white men and only protects other white people so much as it serves white men. And like, that's what white people who aren't equipped to handle the conversation don't get. But that's also what white men who are in power want to occlude and make confusing, to make it seem like, oh, if I'm attacking Rupert Murdoch, or if I'm attacking fucking Joe Rogan, that's the same thing as attacking Billy Bob over here in the fucking trailer park that just got hit by a fucking fire. Like, that's not the same thing, but by them conflating themselves with the blue collar white people, it gets those blue collar white people to protect the rich ones, with the rich ones knowing damn well those blue collar white people are never going to make it into their fucking inner circles. So it's this big, like, and it's not even just it's a feudal, neo-feudal patriarchal system that depends upon an information hierarchy being established that serves to conflate the white rich male with just white people, because white people aren't that person. And especially like a white trans person, of course, doesn't have the same like patriarchal benefit as a cis white male, especially a cis het white male. So like the idea that all white people are like equal, it's not, of course it's not accurate, but the the neo-feudal patriarchal system depends upon white people thinking that they are the same as that white male, cis het male patriarch, in terms of like Lance Armstrong. I cannot believe this motherfucker has the ball to say anything about fairness in sports. Like, that's what the white male protection does. Like, you could get caught fucking cheating in one of the biggest cheating scandals in all of sport, not just bicycling,
No,
all
the
of
history
sports history. And this motherfucker has the ball to say some shit about transgender people and fairness, that's white male exceptionalism rotting his fucking brain. His brain is rotten. The fact that, like, say what you will about George W. Bush, he knows how to shut the fuck up. That motherfucker knows how to shut the fuck up and stay out of the fucking limelight. In terms of, like, this is where I'm thinking about, like, the things that protect white men from existential threats or their egos being harmed. Like, George Bush knows he has that, and he has internalized shutting the fuck up. Whereas clearly Lance Armstrong's like, is my cancel time over? I'm gonna come out and say some stupid shit because I'm a fucking white man and I can't keep my fucking stupid opinion to myself because white men's opinions are always protected. Cancel culture is not real. And then he drops the mic because in reality, he's not gonna really get any repercussions for saying this fucking stupid shit about fairness because he's Lance Armstrong, but because he's a white male. And that's the craziest shit about it is, like, in a way, the idea that, like, any news outlet ever even ran the story before being like, hey, hold on, aren't you Lance Armstrong? You're going to talk about, no, you need to shut the fuck up. You are a trans man in terms of, like, your entire career, you took a bunch of gender affirming healthcare to make yourself a better man than all the other people you were competing with. So I don't want to talk about fairness, Mr. fucking EPO, fucking testosterone, whatever the fuck he was shooting up, Mr. Gender affirming care.
I think it was hyper oxygenated and hormone rich blood.
He's not a cis male anymore. He can't identify as cis. Because for me, as someone who's never taken performance-enhancing drugs to enhance my maledom, I'm still cis. He's trans now. Even though he was born a man, he's taken gender-affirming care to become more of a man. He's fucking trans. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. He's not cis anymore. So this is where, to me, these people... Joe Rogan is a trans man. I don't give a fuck what he says. He's a trans man. He doesn't want to admit it, but for the last 10 years, we got all these fucking videos of him pushing TRT and growth hormone and fucking all this testosterone therapy. Oh, you're a trans man now. That's what it is. And people want to, like, no, this is not even semantics. That's literally him taking medical supplements to become something that he was not born as. He's a fucking trans man now.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan was not alpha before he started taking testosterone and getting his testosterone boosted and all this stuff by his own metrics. So for me, when I see these people who have all this money but don't even understand the fucking things that they're doing, getting wrapped up in these culture wars, and, like, in the process, outing themselves as like, okay, it's the same shit with Caitlyn Jenner. Like, first thing Caitlyn Jenner did is start hating on trans athletes when Caitlyn was, like, trans. So I'm like, you motherfuckers want to go through a door and then shut it so nobody can come behind you through that door and gatekeep just like the white man. So these are, like, the same fucking people as, like, the house Negro. It's the same fucking shit. It's a house trans person. It's a house gay person. It's a house Latin person. Fucking Michelle Rodriguez. Yeah, you. Fucking, it's house everything. As soon as they get in the house, they want to close the door instead of burning the fucking house down. So this is, to me, like, people will talk about wanting to burn the house down, but as soon as they get let in,
They order the house dressing.
they'll become the fucking firefighter and be like, oh, they're planning to burn the house down. Let's do everything we can to prevent that. So I see these fucking Dave Chappelle, man, that's some crazy shit to go from. It's weird though, because, like, I don't know him personally, but he was always like foot half in, half out of, I won't even call it like black revolution or liberation or anything like that so much as like the black identity. It's hard to tell how much of it he was using as a means to make jokes and how much of it he actually identified with, because like I think he is smart and I don't think he's dumb, and I think he's telling these jokes in a way where it's like when as far back as when he's telling the story about him being in the limousine and the baby on the corner selling crack, it's like a black baby selling crack. He knows he's in the limousine, otherwise that joke wouldn't work. So him putting himself in this situation where he can roll down the window on black culture and access it when he wants to, he knows that. That's part of the joke. That's part of the setup. So I'm struggling to know if his jokes have become mocking himself as a brand, or if he actually believes these things half the time. And the fact that I can't tell is why I can't fuck with him anymore. So it's like part of it is when he gets off the stage and he talks, it doesn't make it any more clear because he gets real esoteric in the way he talks about shit and tries to be deep in a way that I think he thinks is deep, but it's really just like avoiding taking ownership for all of the negative shit that he's doing. And I think he finally realized it when he stopped like telling trans jokes and stopped like punching down at the trans community in terms of like, he's clearly stopped because there's no more material of his being used to attack the trans community. And I think
I bet everyone on Netflix put the big thumbs down on that, on everything he produced after that.
I bet probably.
I mean, I know
but
I
part
did.
of it is I think he was like testing the waters on if he like stops making trans jokes, how many other comedians are going to go viral for trans jokes? And you see not many, if any. Like there's no other Dave Chappelle. There's Chris Rock, and Chris Rock was like still like sucking on that fake slap teat to like be too busy to go on trans tirades, which I don't know if he hates trans people. So I've never seen Chris Rock say anything about trans people. He may have, but I'm not watching Chris Rock specials anymore. So it's like these people
I get the feeling that he's got like a full-on carnival, like feather dress thing, and puts on a really mean drag show.
I mean, maybe, but I just think he's lazy. It's like really easy, because this is what it comes down to. It's really easy to make fun of a group that's already getting punched down on, because there's people that will come in and join in and just laugh to justify their vitriol, or it becomes this like symbiotic relationship between the media they consume feeding their ideas and their ideas pushing them towards that media. And it's like, or I guess their ideology is pushing them towards that media. But regardless, it's easy. And I think in him getting older, he chose to go the easy route rather than to find the more, because like the crazy shit is that discussion would make you think that you can't find funny shit without making fun of somebody who's likely oppressed, or like you have to make fun of someone and you have to punch at someone to find humor. That's not fucking true at all. So, and I think in that construct, there's like all these different types of comedy, and there's not enough understanding of the nuances of the different types of comedy outside of people who consume stand-up comedy regularly, for people to give a fuck enough to care about the argument one way or the other. So they're like, oh, yeah, everybody should be able to be made fun of. And they don't think about it any further because they're like, that's what comedy needs. And to a degree, that's fucking true. Of course, that's true. Nothing should be off limits. But you don't have to go for the lowest hanging fruit. And that's something that Dave Chappelle himself used as an argument as to why he doesn't cross-dress for fucking jokes. So, like, the notion of that was earlier in his career, though. So that was before he started openly attacking trans people. At that point, he was like using it as a frame of like Hollywood execs using hacky jokes as a way of subverting black masculinity by having big stars dress up as women. And I don't disagree with that necessarily in terms of like, at the time, the way it was happening, it was super hacky. I don't necessarily know if it was like I don't think, let me rephrase that. I know for a fact it wasn't some backroom nefarious plot to like subvert black masculinity. It was just lazy. That's all it is. It's like, oh, you take The Rock and put him in a fucking dress. It's funny because it's this big guy, but he's wearing a dress. So like for a while, that type of humor, it was an easy go-to in terms of like really simple people, really simple comedy.
I'd like to
like,
point to
that
the
shit,
entire catalog of Jim Carrey during the 90s.
I was thinking of him. I didn't even want to bring it up.
No, because
like
he made an entire career in the 90s out of characters that were absolutely insane, like a danger to themselves and other people, committing crimes left and right, and people laugh about that stuff.
Or Ace Ventura.
The entirety
is anti-trans as fuck.
Oh,
like
God.
there's this whole element of like making trans people villains because they're trans, and that has thankfully slowed. It hasn't completely stopped. But like Star Trek is one of the worst offenders. But Jim Carrey did that shit all the time, but he didn't do only villains, which is why it's also weird though, because like the ones that weren't necessarily villains were also overly like hyper aggressive with their sexuality and weren't like wary of border or boundaries. So like I feel like the problem with the trans representation by non-trans people in old media is like trans people were painted, not just trans, but trans and gay people were the ones painted as the ones that didn't have any boundaries with other people's persons. When now we fucking know it's mostly the cis dudes that are like having this boundary issue, and it's not fucking trans people, it's not drag queens, it's not fucking gay dudes in general.
I want to point to the Dumb and Dumber character who like basically stalks a woman across the country because of her suitcase.
Exactly, bro. You can
like that's
too many.
That's like one of the most cringy fucking stories that's ever emerged that people laughed about. Like, oh man, that stuff is like. You can't watch it.
Cable Guy
is so disturbing.
It's fucked up.
That shit's so messed up. He finally made an honest horror movie with like that 23 or 21 or whatever it was a number where he went insane, but that wasn't a comedy. It was like an honest thriller movie instead of trying to veil his story in let's laugh at the pain and suffering of people. Let's just make a movie about people in pain and suffering. And I don't think it was received very well because people wanted to laugh about it, which is that just says a lot about the audience. It sucks.
Well, it's weird in terms of like I went to the theater to see Cable Guy, so I remember like how it was marketed and all this shit. So they were like not marketing, like dark comedy didn't really exist yet. So this was like an emerging genre that like predates cringe, I guess. And this was like clearly experimental. I guess another dark comedy would be like Mystery Men.
I think there
But
were
if you
dark
look,
comedies that were there before, but they weren't as common. People
it
didn't.
wasn't a genre
Yeah,
yet. That's what I mean.
it like
Like the
happened by
way they
accident.
marketed it, they
Yeah,
did not market it because they couldn't market it as a quote unquote dark comedy yet. So when you went to the theater and saw it, like nobody was laughing in Cable Guy, and people were like walking out. I remember that was the first time I had actually seen somebody walk out of a movie theater. That in like Biodome, I think. Like I don't remember any other major walkouts, but like multiple people walked out of Cable Guy. I'm like, oh shit. Like that's crazy. Like that was crazy to me as somebody who, it wasn't my money because I'm a kid. Like watching this movie, I'm like, why would you like waste your money and not finish a movie? But at the time, the way it was marketed, nobody was prepared mentally to go into that movie because it was completely marketed as just a comedy and not like some sort of new genre that people had to, you know, like you're about to watch a bunch of horrible shit and that's the funny part. And you're like, "Wait, what?" If that movie had been marketed that way, nobody could go like you're going to watch one dude do a bunch of horrible shit to another guy and not get caught. If it had been marketed like that, nobody go see that. And I think a lot of people went and saw it initially, but were so off put that nobody kept going to see it, which is where like, I mean, I don't remember the box office numbers, but it was not well received. I know that part in terms of it was the disconnect between the marketing and what it actually was. But like critics were like, oh, this is a great film. So this is one of those times where the audience and the critics, it happens frequently, but the audience and the critics were definitely not seeing eye to eye on that film. But it stayed in the, like, I think it helped push dark comedy because the critics received it well. So other directors started making more dark comedies, and were able to like make that a genre in a way where then you get the like Rushmores and the Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou's and shit like that, where if I feel like Wes Anderson's
practically his own genre, though.
But it wouldn't have happened if Cable Guy and Mystery Men didn't happen and didn't get a few people who saw it and were like, oh, I get it. And I feel like Mystery Men has aged really well. Certain parts of it have aged really well. Anything Hank Azaria does has aged horribly, effectively. Anybody can go look that up. White men, man. That's all I can say about Hank. Do you remember the first Cleveland Brown?
I remember. On Family Guy.
Yeah,
He was a
voice actor.
lot like it was. It was not the whiny nose. It was like it was more gruff. It was more abrasive sounding.
Not the character, the voice actor.
I don't remember the voice actor, but I remember like the early version of the character sounding completely different than the one we got later.
Well, there's a reason why, and it's because the original voice actor was not a black man at all, remotely. So they were using this character to make it seem like they had black representation, meanwhile making fun of black people and also a white guy doing it. So this is like why they eventually replaced Cleveland Brown's voice with a black man and made him less of a butt of the joke rather than the protagonist of the series, and gave him his own series. It was almost like an apology show,
Huh.
which I think they even said on there at some point. Like, I think that's one of the jokes they made.
Oh man.
Um,
Well, that explains why the writing on that show is so weird. It didn't seem like it was. It didn't seem like it was the origin of a show. It seemed like a really bizarre spin-off. I could never
Yeah.
put my finger on it. Like I tried watching it, and some of it was funny, but some of it was just fell flat for me. But I think
well,
that's kind of where we're at with a lot of shows. Everything is a spin-off of something else. I looked recently at Walking Dead, and there's like, half a dozen spin-offs. I'm probably missing a few actually, but there are so many of these Walking Dead story spin-off universes that are all story spin-offs within the universe that what really? Does everything need a universe now? Can't it be contained in a story? Is it impossible to have a self-contained story now? Not just a universe, but a metaverse? Like everything has some extra function in a different show now.
so I think we've been convinced that more is better, by people who want everything to be faithful to books. And I've come to this conclusion in terms of like a lot of media, especially adaptation, is like always compared to a book as the effective pinnacle of what a story being told could be in the form of. And I think it's because books are like longer. Among like you can
Well, for people who read, they are more immersive, but for people who don't
I
read, a
mean,
book is just an obstacle, I think.
that's like that's subjective, so I don't even count that. It's more so like you can do things in a book more frequently and easier, like
Oh yeah,
inner monologues,
yeah,
than it is to do in a film.
yeah.
So
No.
it makes it seem like a book gets you information that, for the sake of the story, is better. When in reality, you don't necessarily need to know what every fucking body's thinking all the goddamn time. So like, there's these things about what you can do in books that people who put books at the top romanticize about being the most important part of a storytelling process, when a story being told is like subject to necessity of what needs to be there. And I look at like, okay, I'll take a book that I've read and one that has a mini series and then a film, The Shining. Like, you could say, and it's funny with Stephen King especially, I would actually argue most of the adaptations of the work of his work's sake, The Dark Tower, and there's one more that's fucking horrible. But most of the adaptations of his works are better than his books,
The Stand.
and it's because, oh, The Stand, yes, yes, yes.
The Stand.
Um,
Yeah.
There's one more too, though. But regardless, his books are like bloated. And oh, Lawnmower Man. Lawnmower Man is fucking horrible. That's
Yeah.
barely a Stephen King adaptation. So like those three films are like the exceptions to the rule in terms of like most of the adaptations are better because Stephen King's writing is unnecessarily bloated with information.
I want to identify one of the stories that turned out better on a screen is Dreamcatcher, which to read was just like, God, why is this going so damn slow? Why are they talking so much? And then watching the movie Dreamcatcher, it's almost like, wait, that was an entire movie? It happened so quickly. And that to me is like, they captured the essence of the story and made it able to be consumed in a way that I lost track of time. That real time just ceased to exist, and I was drawn in, and then poof, it was over, and the story was self-contained. I didn't need any more information about where the thing came from or what was going to happen afterwards. None of that mattered because the story was over. And it was a really
So
I remember, I mean, I read that story years before that movie was released. And so it was one of those like, oh, cool. I remember like actually liking this. It was a short story.
right.
I couldn't finish The Stand. That was like the longest. They didn't need to make it a multi-part miniseries. They could have wrapped it up in an hour and 45 minutes if they really wanted to.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'd completely forgotten about Lawnmower Man though.
But this gets back to the notion of like, have you read It?
Yeah.
So It is a perfect example of like when you read the book, when you're going down these tangential information paths that he's laying, it feels like they're necessary because of the way he constructs it. So it's like in the time, I think his bloated writing serves the purpose of like wasting time reading, making yourself feel like you're doing something important, or not important, but like constructive, because oh, you're reading a book, it's this fucking gigantic 400-page book, so I must be doing something intellectual, when in reality it's just like bloated, like effectively middle school level language, and middle school level subjects,
Well, yeah,
addressed at a
that's when you're supposed to
middle
read
school.
Stephen King.
Well, but then you realize he's like a middle school kid who just grew up and never actually progressed mentally, but is also like really good at like being verbose. So it's like there's all these things about reading Stephen King as a kid and then growing up and then watching the adaptations of his work and then reflecting on his writing as an adult, where I'm like, oh shit, like he's not that good of a writer. He's a prolific writer. He's written a lot,
Yeah.
but his actual works are like mediocre at best, and they're definitely not.
Well, they're not for young adults. They're teenage stories. Teenagers.
It don't even matter who they're for. They're bloated.
Yeah.
There's like a bunch of shit that could be cut out in terms of like what he's doing makes the reader feel like they're doing more because he's giving them unnecessarily extra stuff, where I'm like, now, like I said, now I can recognize it because I watched The Dark Tower, and that movie was fucking horrible, but not because it was an unfaithful adaptation. Like the way that they went with the story, it was just stupid, and it's like,
I think that movie suffered. It's the same problem that a lot of movies that are like have a lot of visual effects, like they get kind of wrapped up in the visual effects, and the visual effects end up becoming the main focus of the entire movie, and it all boils down to like one sequence or maybe two or three sequences where they really showcase the VFX department. And so the story is built around that moment instead of, I mean, the visual story is built around that moment and leading up to that moment, and not really telling the story. It's not really about the actors anymore, because it's a big blended situation. And I think that's the reason that movies like Matrix and even like District 9 and Chappie are able to achieve, where they kind of force us into this place where the visual effects are always on, always happening, but they're used really subtly. And so we don't because it's not an overt, like, diffusion, emulsion, like dissolve sequence in front of us. All of a sudden it's just there. It's just like they mask it by putting a box of cereal on the table, or an ashtray, or a Burger King cup, and so we think those things are real, and so it blends in. And like with the Matrix, I mean, like, how much of that movie is actually real, and how much of it is just green screen stage on like a big green screen, a cyclorama room, chroma key room. There's no way to tell really because they mask it so well. But those movies also make a point to hide those things. I think that's also the reason that to a lesser, to a greater extent actually, that Marvel movies look as good as they do is because the lines between reality and the uncanny valley they're so diffuse we can't really tell where they begin and end. But not every movie studio has been capable of achieving this, and not every director has the kind of vision to see that kind of marriage of visual information just actually deliver it. I think that's why there are aspects of Dune that are so spectacular, is because they're working with their filming environment, and they're working with a lot of physical features, but then they're going to the great lengths of creating a whole new brand of chroma key paint so that they can do desert scenery without casting weird colors that shouldn't exist in the desert. I think basically it means that there are some directors who probably shouldn't rely on visual effects at all, because it's like a technical mastery or technical or theoretical mastery that's not intuitive, and it's not the kind of thing that people can just fake. You can't just, what was that, Sky Captain, when that was like an early example of a full-on chroma key storytelling experience. It was terrible because they were too heavy with it. It was so heavy, the contrast was so bold that you just can't watch it for very long because it hurts the eyes.
Yeah, it really does. It's actually painful on the eyes.
Yeah, and I think that's the dilemma. A lot of the blockbuster visual effects stuff, that stuff really hurts the eyes, and it has to be dialed back. It has to be muted, and that in itself is that self being reserved and deliberate is the thing that I think really sets apart a good visual effects based story from another, no matter how good the story itself is, because the story is always going to end up becoming second to the visual presentation because it's a movie. If they wanted the story to be the primary focus, they would leave it in literature, because a movie is all about the director's vision for what that story looks like and how they think that the story should be told. And somehow they convinced enough people with money to let them do it. Because, if everybody on the internet who has an opinion about how some story should be told was given enough money to do this stuff, that means that the global economy is doing way better than we think it is.
Well, they don't need the money when AI exists, which is where, to me, it's proof that it's not gonna be the functional change that people think. What's funny is you do have a ton of people uploading 3-minute videos of if this were the 80s version of
the Wes Anderson version of Fellowship of the Rings looked awesome.
Exactly. So you have people doing those AI little montages, but that's about the limit of individuals as far as it looks. I haven't seen anybody make an actual film with AI, but I have seen somebody made a comic book with AI. It looks like trash. But yeah, they made it.
Isn't the intro to Secret Invasion created with AI generated imagery?
It looks horrible.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Absolutely horrible.
That's an absolute kick in the nuts and the juice box of all of the Imagineers that work at Disney on any MCU project. They said, "Okay, guys, just take a break. We're going to let the AI do it. Go ahead, Tinkerbell, whatever. Sorry to use Tinkerbell, but that's the first name of something that creates magical output that I could think of from Disney, off the top of my head. But yeah, or go ahead, Genie, somebody rubbed the lamp, spit out a new intro for a show. hold on design team who've been working on this their entire careers and have like pedigreed educations from, design schools. Just sit back. We're gonna let the machine do it this time. This is one of those times though that I hope that like John Henry wins. Because no, I'm serious. Because
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm not even really questioning it. I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been of the mind that AI can actually do those things well,
yeah,
like in the same way that humans can. Like, they can assist, but they can't take over. And this is why you see the like intro for Secret Wars, and it just looks like absolute dog shit. So I'm like,
when I pressed play and it started going, even though I had been made aware that it was AI generated, I thought there was something wrong with the encoding. Like I was like, this can't be right. What the hell?
Yeah.
And then I changed to a
It
different
looks like a
server.
mistake.
Yeah, it does. I changed this to a different server, and it's like, nope, this is the same. What the hell? So immediately I go to YouTube, of course, and I look for what the hell's wrong with Secret Invasion intro, and there's like, thousands of 5 to 10 minute videos of people complaining about the intro to Secret Invasion. It's hilarious. I hope Disney gets the message.
Yeah, it was not received well.
Man, I had high hopes for like a Secret Wars story too, because that stuff was really cool. We don't get Secret Wars the way that we should. Bastards.
Well, I feel hopefully they won't fuck up the Secret Wars, but like, well,
If this is how it starts.
you know what? Tom Holland hasn't faced Venom yet, right?
That's true. But Venom knows who Spider-Man is. They haven't that brief moment when he was like transported to a different universe. He was like he was on that tropical island and saw it on the TV. Venom knows who Spider-Man is. It's just a matter of getting the properties to translate or to get the agreement so they can get Venom property into a Disney movie.
Well, I'm just wondering if Tom Holland's ever gonna wear a symbiote suit, because that's where I'm like,
He has to get it
I
during
feel
the
like-
Secret Wars. That's when it happens. He gets injured what is it?
I mean, it doesn't have to, and if anything, I'd be happy if they didn't do that, because in terms of like, this is where to me adaptations need to do something different to make
Yeah.
themselves stand out. So like, have you seen The Flash?
Not yet. I'm avoiding it, man.
Well,
I want to see the Batman stuff. I want to see the Supergirl. I want to see Kara Zor-El and Zod face off. I have every expectation that everyone dies because it's a Flashpoint story and it's not actually this is just what could happen type scenario.
well, but it is.
But it
and
is
that's
what
where
happens.
I'm like, no, it's a Flashpoint story. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like, but when you're like, oh, it's a Flashpoint story, they don't tell the Flashpoint story the same every time, which is why when they adapt it, and they have to change it in
Yeah.
order to make it like fresh, and that's what they did. So that's where I'm like,
Well, in the
if they do
animation,
the Secret Wars, like, I don't think that they should necessarily have Tom Holland get a symbiote suit arbitrarily, because that's where I'm like, we all know that beat. So if they don't do it, then it'll surprise us, and then we're like, we've been expecting this thing to happen, and then it doesn't happen, and then they can actually surprise us with something else. So
I think
that's where
that
I'm like,
if they can integrate the Venom property into MCU in a there's a way to do it so it actually works out, so they can tell Eddie Brock's story, and like, there's a point when he kills the Dark One, the symbiote god. Anyways, like, he's got a great story. If they can integrate that, then Disney would actually be able to take it. I think they could actually take Eddie Brock's story like all the way and do a real good adaptation of Venom. And if they go with that, then the symbiote's already introduced on Earth. It's just a matter of integrating that into the broader MCU, which is very easy because it seems like Venom's story takes place in like San Francisco. which seems to be largely untouched in MCU.
Looks like the next movie's on halt because of the writer's strike.
Well, that makes sense. At least we got like 2 or 3 episodes of some new shows before they stopped production, and we're gonna deal with 6 to 12 months of reruns of shows from before we were even able to remember what TV shows were on the air. So it's okay. It's like new TV to us. I don't know, because I'm not watching that stuff. I keep seeing weird shows for like characters that I vaguely remember from my childhood, like the Fonz, or weird Hanna-Barbera shit that's like, from the 70s. And I think to myself, man, they must be like really hurting for content if they're digging this deep in their catalogs.
Yeah, I think the content's gonna fall off a cliff when all of the stuff that was written
It gets aired.
runs. Yeah, and we're like, they're gonna try to produce new stuff that's not the reruns that they're pushing, and that's where I'm like,
Yeah. They're just
content's gonna fall off a cliff, man.
Well, I know exactly what'll happen with the Star Trek, the original series. They'll just reproduce the old scripts, and they'll use all of the sets they've been developing for Strange New Worlds. And so that's Paramount has a path for Star Trek forward, but we're just going to get rehashes of the original series.
Which they already did with like Next Generation, basically.
Yeah.
The only thing that's a major difference is the holodeck takes the place of like a lot of the period piece episodes in the original series.
Oh yeah, when they would like beam down to a planet that's like medieval world or Rome world or Nazi Germany world.
Well, and they figured out how to time travel at the end of season 1 of the original series.
Yeah.
So like it quickly becomes a time travel show.
Yeah. Well, I think we've talked about this before, but the fact that they can travel at warp speed essentially means they're traveling across time. It's always a time travel story. They just never address time dilation.
But well, in season 1, they figure out how to go backwards, like
oh wait, they did go fight the
precision.
Nazis.
Yeah, well, they figured out how to go back with precision and like target specific dates and time. So that's where it's like it's different than
that feeds into
only going
the Voyage
forward
home
faster.
Yeah. And that feeds into Voyage Home when Spock initiates the time warp in a old ass Klingon bird of prey, and they fly around the sun, go back to 80s San Francisco and save a pair of whales. It's so fucking preposterous. But lo and behold, here we are like 30 years later, and transparent aluminum is a real thing, so maybe it's okay. We've got a whole bunch of Star Trek technology like at the consumer level. I'm okay with most of Star Trek. Just how long can they keep milking it before it's like dry? Or is it already dry? And if it is dry, how much longer can it go before it stops being Star Trek and just becomes a stable soap opera? Is it already a stable soap opera?
It always was.
Well, there it is. Then,
I mean, it always was a soap opera. It was one of the first televised space operas, not like the very first one, because like I feel like people have called what's it? Oh, one of the Vedas a space opera. So like people are claiming, space operas go back at least a couple thousand years, but Star Trek was definitely one of the first.
at least
First,
televised.
like live action recorded.
Yeah. Hmm. You know, there's probably like a. I think the movie industry is probably gonna be is. They probably have a backlog of scripts that they've like backburnered and didn't say no to, and we're just leaving somebody on hold. And that script is probably ready to go. Or there are projects that got put on hold, but those scripts had already been given the green light at one point. I bet there's quite a big backlog of stories that can still be told. They just weren't profitable enough to compete with whatever was happening at the time. But now those stories have an option. It's just whether or not that writer is gonna like break the lines and say, "Yeah, I'll take the money," or whether or not the story's already ready to go and they just have to greenlight the rest of production and just hire people to make it happen.
I think that's definitely true. But those are stories that initially got passed on, so that's where it's like just because they exist
Oh, I'm not
doesn't
saying they're
mean.
going to be good. I'm just saying that there's probably a lot of stories that could be told in lieu of having no new stories being written. We're headed for dark times in terms of storytelling. Yeah, well, visual
Yeah,
storytelling.
I think that's exactly the ones that they're gonna lean on. So yeah, on that note,
It's, it's not a
it's like
scarcity
they take
issue.
those. Right. No, it's not. Definitely not. It was never a scarcity issue. For every script that gets produced, there's a pile of
Crap.
tossed scripts.
Yeah.
So it's like now we're gonna see the tossed scripts, but they're not gonna even be edited well because there's nobody like from the proper profession to edit them correctly. So you're gonna get like
We're gonna get a bunch of YouTube movies.
unfinished, yeah, unfinished scripts being turned into full movies.
Man,
Um,
these greedy bastards. It's not like they weren't making money hand over fist.
it's never enough, man.
I know.
Well, it's like there's definitely something that is, let's use the right word. It's endemic about people not having enough. Like I've seen this apparently there is a Reddit uh board called Overemployed. And there's these people who actively try to be, doing 2 or 3 remote jobs full time. And you read it, and it's exactly the person you think. They're the person who was in the group project and didn't do shit and wanted to get the A and was like trying to cheerlead everybody but not do any work. And that's who these people are. But they're like reinforcing each other's bad decision making on this board. And it's like,
Why is bad decision making rewarded in this culture? Like, I just don't
because
understand.
there's not enough because there's not enough people to fucking check them, and that ultimately we've devolved so much in terms. Well, I don't know if we were ever evolved, but there's not enough people to like call bullshit, so these people make it through the interview process or whatever. Like I saw this crazy statistic in terms of they took the same application and changed a few things about it. Like a white man with a criminal record is more likely to get called back for a job than a black man with no criminal record if they have the exact same qualifications because they use the same application for this test. So it's like we have a problem where you get this like there's no meritocracy anywhere seemingly, and further there are systems in place that allow the like overemployed lie on your CV, lie in the interview, say you know how to speak a language that you don't know how to speak, people get into these positions and keep them somehow. And it's probably because there's other people who did the same shit to get in their position. So that's where I'm like, there's too many of those people in the American economy in actual positions of authority, I think, to pull out of the tailspin. And it's like, something will emerge, but this shit is crashing quickly the same way that the Titan sub imploded. It's like when you don't get enough people in a position to like actually check information that are qualified, but you get a bunch of rich people who give the semblance of authority because they fucking have money, you're gonna
Man,
push
it's
out a submersible that's not rated. It's not rated.
so this shit's actually really fucked up. I've been following the Titan debacle very closely. One of the cameramen from Discovery Channel said that he knew it was going to happen because they went on a test drive 2 years ago in Puget Sound, and everything was going good until the propulsion system stopped working, and then the computers stopped working, and then the Ocean Gate CEO guy, he started trying to reboot the system, and they're using touch screens, and I'm sure they're using advanced technology, and you got to see my air quotes for this, but you can't. But in my mind, like, they're just using like a really streamlined Raspberry Pi or an Android tablet as their primary interface to control this thing, because when you start reading about some of the other decisions that were made, it gets a lot scarier. Like, they hired a consultant from the Navy, like an actual expert in submersibles, and he said they were barely able to get like 100 feet down before the vehicle started to exhibit strange behavior. And so after they aborted that trip, he gave them a reasonably favorable, like, all things are going well, but they hadn't done enough research on the hull, the carbon fiber hull. And so he expressed concerns that the hull wouldn't be able to maintain its effectiveness over the course of multiple dives. And so it gets a little bit messed up, because they were using and I found this information earlier. It's they were using an advanced titanium filament wound carbon fiber that should have been able to withstand the pressures that they were putting into it, meaning like it can hold itself together like a balloon, but they're not actually designed to withstand external pressures. And part of that is because it's disparate materials in contact with each other that are constantly undergoing stress. And so at the point where these materials come into contact, there's actually a shearing force that is variable. It's like and so at the coupling points, like at the nose where they put the dome on, which was apparently only rated for 4,000 feet, not the 13,000 feet or 12,600 something feet that the Titanic actually sits at, a third of that. And so there's concerns about how the coupling mechanism is attached to this carbon fiber shell, which is shaped like a tube, not a sphere, which is generally recognized as the strongest structure, which is why most deep sea submersibles are only built for one occupant. And so it gets even worse. Apparently they bought material that was had expired because it sat around and hadn't been used. But
of course.
Yeah, we got a good deal on it. And they were using lead pipes for ballast and sandbags. And their balloon system at one point was, not actually working properly. Like, it wasn't inflating the balloons at the same rates. And they had considerable problems, it seems, over the course of the last 2 years. They had to cancel numerous attempted dives. And they managed to take it down a couple times, but I'm pretty sure the only reason they came back is because they got lucky. And I want to emphasize, man, they got really lucky every time they went anywhere deep. And they reported that they put it in pressure chambers and took it into very deep depths, and they had sensors to indicate if there was any issues with structural integrity. But apparently at 4,000 feet, the pressure is so intense that, it's like a can of beans just getting smashed instantaneously. And like
No, it's like
James Cameron went on like television to talk about this shit. And he was talking about how like, it's just so dangerous what they're doing, but they have all these safety measures in place. Like there are all these regulations in place to do this stuff because they don't want to die, and they all follow this. And this guy, what was it? He was described as like his biggest flaw was this overwhelming sense of confidence in his ability. Like he was some kind of like pioneering expert for just disregarding all of the warnings from within the submersible community. It's like at every opportunity that they had to take a step back and say, let's actually take a look at what's going on and really think about it. He's like, they don't know what they're doing. They're hampered by regulations. I'm the innovator. I'm the pioneer. And then he ends up killing 4 other people with him, to the tune of charging him $250,000 a seat in a coffin the size of a minivan.
I was
Control.
seeing something that said it imploded so quickly that their nerves didn't, or their neurons didn't have time to fire.
Yeah, it happens. It happens instantaneously. Like instantaneously. I don't think the common perception of instantaneously is as fast as instantaneously actually is.
No, if it like made a sound during the implosion, that shit had to be so forceful.
Yeah.
In the instantaneity of the event.
Yeah, that a naval buoy 100 miles away heard it.
Yeah. An audible implosion has to have so much force in terms of like what I'm imagining is they lost control and it started descent. I mean, from the way it sounded, their descent was fairly uncontrolled in the first place, and it was just basically like, oh, we dropped to the bottom instead of like stopping at atmospheric points like you're supposed to.
Oh, they didn't even
like
get all the way to the bottom before it collapsed.
No fucking way, because the hull had started to crack.
Yeah.
So it's like with carbon fiber hulls, or with carbon fiber, repeated stress.
Yeah, it causes the delamination to initiate.
Yes, and then it can suffer an immediate and catastrophic failure, which is why they tend to use steel or other
like extruded titanium or forged steel or
because it doesn't have the like.
It doesn't flex like that. Doesn't suffer stress like that. Like James Cameron was talking about how the reason they use titanium and steel is because they can use that, thousands of times before the stress will actually start to become apparent in the structure of the metal, like the molecular structure of the metal.
Well, and it's like if you don't actually take it past the stress point, the stress doesn't wear it out to the point that it'll suffer a catastrophic failure. It will erode it, but it won't erode it to the point that it will suffer catastrophic. And that's the main difference as to why none of these submersibles are.
Do you know what caused the most?
No of the rated submersibles were carbon fiber.
Yeah. Do you know what caused the most damage to Deep Challenger? I just read about this yesterday. It's fucked up. It caught on fire during a transportation on the road, out of water. Another vehicle caught on fire and caught it on fire, and that damaged it. It wasn't its actual utilization in the water that caused any damage to it. It was being transported that caused it damage. That's the world we live in. James Cameron's multi-million-dollar hammer wasn't damaged by using it. It was damaged because it was in the back of a truck. What really blows my mind, though, is that, from what I understand, the deep sea submersible community isn't that big. They all know each other. They're all friends. They all go to the same conventions to talk about deep dives and technology. And OceanGate, which is uniquely already named for its its eventual, day in court and the media. Um, they ignored it all. It seems like they just ignored all the warning signs. They ignored it all. They just went for it.
I think I saw the number. It was something like only 90 submersibles that are rated for like deep sea diving.
Yeah, something like that. It's really not that big of a number. And what's crazy is that, like, in the, what is it? I read some, like, in the 60 years since, like, deep sea diving has become an actual, like, exploratory path, they haven't lost that many people. This is, like, seriously catastrophic. This is like the biggest punch to the gut of deep sea exploration tourism. But I think it's also a reminder that they shouldn't be trying to take a bunch of people 13,000 feet down below the surface of the water, where, literally the most inhospitable place on earth, because we can't even get there. Like, you can walk right up to a volcano if you have, like, the right kind of suit. You don't need to go in with a freaking spaceship. It's not like these people were gonna build a submarine to go into Titan, to actually go to Titan and house human beings. We don't even know if that's gonna be possible.
Well, it sucks that this happened, but I think it won't happen again in terms of regulatory bodies moving to like make sure that not just anybody can launch a fucking submersible.
Yeah.
Or like sell tickets aboard a submersible. Like, yeah,
Oh,
if
yeah.
you want to go dive, you can do that on your own, but you can't sell a ticket aboard a fucking uncertified submersible.
Yeah.
And the fact that they could, and they were $250,000 tickets, that's the government's fault for allowing that shit to happen in terms of like,
Yeah.
there's a whole reason they had certification on vessels in the first place.
Yeah.
So for them to permit the quote unquote market, because it's not a free market.
Well,
because
it's one thing for I keep referencing James Cameron because he's the most visible submersible operator, designer, builder. His ship isn't technically certified, but he's not selling tickets in it. It's just him and his other engineer buddy who designed it.
Well,
who
and where
go
you
down
launch
in it.
from also makes a difference if they're going out into international waters like that. Yeah, of course the American government can't fucking
But if American tax dollars are being used to go save these people, then they better be fucking compliant with regulations.
Or if the ship is launching from an American port and then taking people who bought a ticket in America, or that's when the government needs to step in and be like, hey, you can't sell tickets to Americans, or the Canadian government, you can't sell tickets to fucking Canadians or whatever, or anybody in these borders. If you're going to try to launch that ship from here, you can't do that shit if you're trying to make it some sort of like commercial endeavor. And as long as they took those steps, we wouldn't have had fucking 4 other people. Like, what's the name? Stockton Rush would have just died himself instead of other unwitting people who trusted his
hubris,
his unfounded confidence, because those people trusted him, but his confidence came from a false place.
Well, there was this guy named Jay Bloom. He's a businessman out of Las Vegas. He and his son were offered seats, and he went on a trip to go check it out. And they were gonna go to Titanic, but 2 hours in, they had to stop, and because the vehicle lost contact with their support vessel, and then they had to resurface. So it's fucked up. Like,
and the dude's stepson was like on Twitter hitting on an OnlyFans model before it was made public that the shit had imploded. Effectively, he was doing this publicly while after the implosion had happened unknowingly. So his mom had to ask him to take the shit down, because he was like, he went to like a Blink 182 concert and was like posting about it. And was like, some OnlyFans model was like, oh, I'll, whatever, because you're sad and to make you feel better. And this motherfucker's like responding to it. And it's like not even in the DMs, responding to that shit publicly.
Ugh.
So this motherfucker's stepson out here making it way difficult to have any ounce of like sympathy or empathy for these people in terms of like I feel bad if somebody like runs out in front of a car going 70 miles an hour and like dies. Like existentially, I feel bad for them because they died, not because they did it to themselves. So there's like this line of like, it sucks that somebody dies, period. But like, I can't feel bad for this person who like broke all these safety rules with a smile, with a smirk at that.
And told
then
everyone else that they didn't know what they were talking about. Told experts they didn't know what they were talking
exactly.
about.
Fired the employee who raised the flag over it, and
Fired the one expert that they had on staff.
Like, I can't feel bad for that motherfucker in terms of like, I can feel bad for his wife, not for his kid, because his kid's a fucking soulless dumbass who's out partying while his stepdad's like,
crushed
fucking fish food at this point. Like, because they were saying that the shrapnel would have been moving at such high velocity that there's like,
oh, they were liquefied and they were completely liquefied when the thing crushes itself, and like most likely the stuff that comes out will never be able to be identified or reconstituted into anything.
Oh, there's not anything to fucking.
There's nothing to recover. Even if they found even if they found the pressure chamber, whatever like biological remains that they found inside would be indistinguishable from anything.
Because it's also the heat.
Yep.
Might have been so extreme that it just vaporized them in the process.
Yeah, no, that's
like
it's an incomprehensible amount of pressure that came crushing down on them like instantaneously.
And
like
in reality, it's not a bad way to go out. Like in terms of like knowing all of the things, like if this person subjected themselves to that shit happened before they even were aware that they were in trouble.
Yeah.
Most likely.
Yeah.
So it's like if you can like die before your neurons have a chance to even fire that you're in trouble, that's not actually a bad way to go out. So like in terms of that part, I don't even really feel bad for them because like they didn't suffer. They definitely didn't suffer.
There might have been some confusion before, like, hey, what's going on?
No, I don't even in terms of like the way that they've reported it, it seems like the way it happened, it probably would have been like the only confusion would have been in Stockton Rush's decision making.
Yeah.
It'd been like, should he be doing this? And Stockton would be like, oh, it's no big boom.
Yeah.
And it's like they would have been being assured by Stockton that, oh, what he's doing is exactly what they need to be doing in this
right up to the second that
he's done it many times before. Don't worry. Boom. And that's where, the way that like they've described the events playing out, that's probably I would imagine closest to what actually happened inside that sub.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't think there was any like holding hands before we die. Where,
not at all. They didn't know. It happened so quickly that at best,
from what it sounds.
Yeah. No, I mean, from what I understand about like the physics of that kind of event, it's like, it's an explosion. It's like a gun going off, except it's a giant capsule imploding under the weight of the ocean. It's almost immeasurable how much force was applied to that tiny little capsule. Because
it's the whole ocean.
It's the whole
not just
fucking ocean.
It's not just the local area. It's the entire fucking ocean.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that just the idea of, oh yeah, I'm going to put myself inside of a can and drop down to the bottom of the ocean. It just seems like man, please just redirect those funds towards like a local like community effort or a regional like infrastructure project, or maybe like stabilize the entirety of a small Southeast Asian nation for 3 months. Don't just waste $1 million or billions of dollars. Who knows how much money they actually wasted on this entire project? Like they tried to launch it in 2018, but couldn't go anywhere for 3 years until 2021, and they've had issues ever since. Like they've gone down a couple times and got back because they were lucky, but always with issues. And one of the people that went on it at one point at not even a deep sea dive, just like a reasonable sea dive, raised concern that the dome was only rated for 4,000 pounds, but the guy apparently Rush said, "Oh no, it's okay, it's all good. These things are way stronger than what they're rated for. These are designed by NASA." I'm pretty sure when NASA rates something, they're really accurate about what it's rated for.
Hmm.
Like I don't think NASA would be able to design robots with such specific tolerances that they could survive like almost a decade of Martian dust storms without failing until they're completely covered in dust. Until their photovoltaic panels have been eroded to the point that they become matte and no longer transmit light effectively. Like they design stuff to such a high degree of precision that the idea that they would underrate a dome just seems a little. That just seems like a, a bold marketing sales pitch. That's like the salesman slapping the dome saying, "Oh yeah, this baby can take way more than what NASA rated it for." And a freaking video game controller is the main interface for their nav system. That's just like
That and a cheap one at that.
that just pisses me off.
It's just such like, well, and they were trying to use Bluetooth connection.
That's even more
Um,
insulting.
So the controller would lose connection to the device that's on the outside of the submersible.
God, what a
Because these fucking idiots were trying to use wireless controls in the depths of the ocean.
yeah, where like the salinity of the water affects the ionic charge of the water itself, and then the magnetic field created by the ship would just create so much radio frequency interference that who knows what's going on.
Man, sometimes the wall between the bathroom and my living room breaks the Bluetooth connection between my phone and my watch. You're not about to catch me using fucking Bluetooth to drive anything above ground, in the sky, below the water. Not anything with the actual person in it. Are you fucking insane?
I think the only way to shield the capsule so that you could use a wireless control system is if the capsule itself is shielded by stuff like titanium or solid steel. I think that's how that works. I think that's one of the reasons they use those materials. Like the idea that the U.S. military or that people who have survived going down to extreme depths are just like blowing smoke about using certain materials. It just seems like that's like the most cavalier bullshit I've read online, just in terms of exploration. Like even Richard Branson built his spacecraft out of aerospace rated materials, and he didn't even go into space. He just got really high up in like the thermosphere or something. Fuck, even Jeff Bezos, who seeks to deliver everything at the lowest possible rate, is still spending the money on Blue Origin spacecraft so that their rocket systems can return. Like,
Right.
even
Yeah,
even
for-
Elon and SpaceX, they're like going the distance and using materials that are rated for the fucking task that they're doing. Like, as much as I want to hate on Lord Twitter face, like his companies do really cool stuff. My real complaints have really for a long time just been conflict batteries, but I can't really complain about that anymore.
Which again, he didn't do any of that.
No, he
So
didn't
it's
do
like,
anything.
yeah,
He just signs his name on stuff and shows up and looks pretty. But
that's why it's cool. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. It'd be if he was actually inventing stuff like that. Yeah, he would be that cool, but he's not. He's
No,
just
he just shows up and signs
buying
shit.
it.
Hey, at least Bezos got into his spaceship. You know, at least
Well,
this
but
guy
this is
got into his
also
submarine. You know, at least they're willing to get into their own device. I still think space tourism is fucking dumb, though. This is even dumber. Under deep sea tourism has got to be like that's the one thing that makes it's like, well, wait, what are our options? Deep sea tourism or going into space for like the same amount of time? They're both equally dangerous. Which one's more dangerous? They're both equally dangerous. Well, which way is the more horrible way to die? They're both instantaneous. Man, I think
well,
I think I'd
not to
rather go
dive.
into space than go into the depths of the ocean, though.
Well, full circle. I don't know if you've looked outside. Chaos is coming.
Yeah.
Like we're in a tornado warning right now in
Oh
terms
shit.
of like, it happened earlier and it's going till 10 p.m. But it's like we can talk about
Oh
going
shit. We do have a
to the
tornado
bottom of the
watch.
yeah, that's what or watch, not warning, sorry. But this shit's gonna come to us.
Yeah.
And it's like um eventually the hostile environment in which we live will get close enough to us that it's like I don't know how close you've been to a tornado, but I can't imagine.
Oh, when I was in middle school, a tornado touched down like in the back field. Not middle school, in elementary school, like the sixth grade. There was a tornado that touched down right next to the to Binford Middle or Elementary School. And other than that, the closest I've ever been was like downtown. When I lived downtown, we were all going to IU, and the that tornado touched down in Seminary Square. That's as close as I've ever been to that kind of destructive power. Everything else is just watching it on the screen or looking at pictures on the internet because that shit's terrifying, and I have no desire to get into a fucking armored vehicle and pretend to be a badass riding into a cyclone. That just seems like a terrible idea to me.
Well, and watching people do it, it's like, yeah, there's only a certain demographic doing
I mean,
it.
my desire to go exploring in my truck and go off road is kind of limited to when the weather's decent. Like, I don't want to. I'm not interested in hanging out and getting rained on and driving around in weather that I can't see shit or going someplace. Actually, no, I don't mind like being out in the snow, but I don't want to go drive around someplace where if I make a mistake, I end up in a ditch that I can't get out of. It's. I think it's one thing like the for a culture that prides itself on individuality and rugged go anywhereness, like I see a lot of examples of people going out of their way to put themselves into positions where they could get stuck and where they could lose their investment in their machine or their tools or their toys or whatever it is, and they tempt fate and get lucky and walk away from it and then go do it again.
Yeah.
I
I
just
think
don't
that's
I don't understand that lack of risk aversion.
I think the more a person doesn't get some sort of like life threatening event happen when they do that shit, the less sensitized they are to the threat
Yeah.
or to a threat. And it like compounds into like storm chasers or jackass or CKY. Um, like the idea of the jackass guys.
They should go to space. Jackass in space would actually be worth it. Yeah, it might solve a lot of problems. Like down the road. Not like immediately, of course, but it would cause a lot of
Oh,
confusion immediately. But
I just
okay,
got an extreme emergency weather alert.
I just opened up the weather channel and it's bright. It's red, and normally it's blue, so that means it's bad.
Yeah, I don't get emergency weather alerts on my phone very often, or if hardly ever. I get Amber alerts like maybe twice every 1 or 2 months. But emergency weather alert, holy shit! It because it's like it must be bad if they're sending out the weather alert to phone.
So it looks like it's just northwest of Bloomington right now, and it's heading east, like
Really quick.
due east. And yeah, it's moving really fast. Expect hail, golf ball size hail.
Yeah, it's like it's funny in terms of I've been watching, storm chasing the past couple of weeks, and it is you can see these storms moving across America because they'll chase them. Um, but it's like, yeah, the shit that just happened in Texas. Um, you could see you basically when you have the storm chasers, you can see like the trail of destruction being left across like Texas and Alabama and fucking um because it's not just the tornadoes, it's the hail too.
Yeah.
This is crazy. Oh, I wonder if the hail is what's gonna be the problem because they're like, I just got another one. Um, seek shelter, move to the interior.
Golf ball size hail, 60-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
that's
crazy.
pretty serious.
Yeah.
Where are the hailstorm chasers at? Where are the guys that like getting pelted with golf balls
Well,
at?
they're just storm chasers now. They're not just chasing tornadoes because
And
the
I'm not
weather
trying to be
events are so
sexist, but
extreme.
I don't know many women who are like predisposed to running around with getting hit by golf balls.
Mm-mm. Nah.
Most of the women that I've met are pretty like reasonable. This totally sounds like the kind of thing some like skateboarder jackass CKY generation dudes who never like grew up would be into. Guys, let's go get beat up by a hailstorm on our
Holy
skateboards.
shit, it's moving so fast. Wow. Yeah, this storm is moving real fast. It's gonna be here and gone.
So earlier this week, I was looking at I was watching this guy on YouTube talk about a low pressure cell that was just hanging out in the Midwest. Just it was a stable low pressure zone, and he said that he was talking about how there was concern because there is a large group of cyclones that are moving across the Atlantic up from like across from Africa towards us, and then also from the west coast there's this really high pressure region that's also pushing a whole bunch of crap towards us because destabilized western fires and all that stuff. And so it's all kind of feeding into the Midwest right now because low pressure zone versus high pressure zone. High pressure zone always wins. Man, if you zoom out to like the to a whole continental U.S. view, the thing that's circling over the Midwest right now is just gigantic. It spans all the way down to
Yeah.
Montgomery, Alabama, and all the way up into that's like the middle of Ontario. Like, yeah, all the way into the middle of
Oh,
Ontario.
the siren's going off now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's crazy. All of the leaves in my yard just stopped moving. No, no, they're still moving. They're just in the side yard. They're not moving.
So it looks like what was it? Tropical storm Brett, and
Oh,
then
they
now
named
they
it
have
Brett.
Cindy.
They're on this.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the one they were talking about earlier this week was Brett.
Yeah. Now
They
there's
didn't have Cindy
Cindy.
yet. Too. So, okay, that's cool. I dig that.
Well, and the fucked up thing about tropical storms is sometimes they can be worse
Yeah,
than
because they're huge.
hurricanes. Well, it's not just that they're huge, it's that they move slowly and cause flooding events because they're not moving through fast.
Yeah,
So it's like it just sits and rains and like, you want it to actually move through with the obvious caveat that you don't want it to move too fast because the winds would then be super fast, but it's like, yeah, these weather events are getting more and more frequent and more extreme to the point that I think a lot of these like climate change deniers are going to be in the areas that are being hit the most. So it's
Oh
like
man.
it don't matter if they believe it or not. Like they're gonna get like flooded out of their home or like tornadoed out of their home.
The band
So
of
they can like
activity along the equator is incredible. It's really incredible. There's so much weather activity along the equator right now.
yeah, there's like a huge warm front that's like mixing or hitting a cold front. And so that's where that bomb cyclone is forming. But
I
yeah,
don't, I
it's
don't,
really
it no longer blows my mind that there are people who can't wrap their head around climate change, because I think if somebody were just to say like, man, haven't you heard about climate change? And nope, I better go look it up. And they come and look at something like this, they'd be like, no fucking way. Like, how can they know this stuff? And I think that's a lot of it because the science behind it is actually that complicated. The technology behind it is that advanced that it's so far removed from the average person. Where the most sophisticated piece of technology they have is their cell phone. Oh, look, Monroe County is under a tornado warning. Seek appropriate shelter immediately. Move to the most interior room within your residence. Stay away from any windows. If you reside in a mobile home, seek sturdy shelter nearby.
that's crazy. You did it just come through for you?
Just came through for me right now.
So it's like a 5 minute delay. Or no, wait, 6 minute delay. So
Interesting.
it's crazy.
Well,
I wonder how that works. Or I wonder if it goes out by tower then.
well, there are National Weather Service substations all over the place.
Right.
And anybody who has one of those crazy looking weather vane things that look like an airplane, that stuff communicates to National Weather Service. And most of at least the fancy ones, have lightning detectors and well, ambient light sensors, and all of that stuff is relayed to NWS.
Okay.
So it could be that I'm sure it's a proximity
No,
thing.
it is in terms of like you're actually about the time south it would have taken for that storm to start moving towards the area. So like I bet it
Oh
did
yeah,
hit. Like if it didn't move your direction, you would never have gotten it.
yeah.
And it's like the way it's moving, it actually makes a lot of sense that it hit. The warning hit me first, and then in you about like I said, the time later as far as like
Yeah,
I,
you're almost directly north of me.
yeah.
I never
But
actually
even
thought
at
about
that, it's
that.
like slightly northwest. So you're just like we're in the path of the storm if it keeps going straight.
Yeah,
So that's where that timing it actually makes really perfect sense.
yeah, yeah. No, that does make sense. That's Hey, we're up to 3 warnings for Bloomington. Got the wind, the tornado, and a hail warning.
Well, and it hasn't hit. It's so dark over here, but it hasn't actually hit yet.
Yeah.
Where I think this is actually going to be a big one. It seems like
The
I haven't heard any thunder or anything yet.
severe thunderstorm warning ends at 4 p.m. though. That's only 4 minutes from now. The tornado watch goes till 8 p.m. though.
I guess we just got to hit a thunder lightning strike. It's just hitting us. That's crazy. But on that note, yeah, we don't have to go to the bottom of the ocean. That shit'll come to us.
Yeah. And whoop. Okay, that's our our Zoom system just gave us the warning.
Oh, really?
That noise that came through was over the Zoom system.
Whoa. Yeah. Time to peace out.
Yeah, on that note,
Exceptional radio.